Okay, Nate Hochman. Hock. Is it Hochman or Hochman?
The anglicizes Hawk. I think I was in Germany once, and that was like the one time anyone has ever like said it the right way. But Americans say Hawkman, so I'm an American, so I say Hawkman.
Oh, so it is Hochman according to the
No,
Germans.
it's like Hawk, like with like your back of your throat, but like
Ah,
talk like that. So
Hochman.
yeah, something like that.
Nice. Okay, cool, cool. And is that the Jewish side or not the Jewish side?
Yeah, German Jewish on my dad's side. I'm a halfie like you.
Yeah,
Um,
except you're a dad.
so yeah, on my dad's side, so I don't really count, but I think they got out of there like right before things started getting kind of hot for the Jews.
Oh,
So like
really? Okay.
Ellis Island era, yeah.
Oh,
They're
you're an Ellis Islander.
Mhm.
Nice.
What about you? When did your family get here?
So my dad's family got here in 1500s.
Oh,
I have one of those Mayflower maps that goes all the way back to it's funny. It's like goes all the way back and it goes, he slayed the Indian chief like frog boots in 1568. Which is cool. And then the other side is Jew, and they got here. My mom's family, I think it was like Russian diaspora, so that would be like very end of 1800s, early 1900s. So also Ellis Island, Ellis Islanders as well.
so you're a WASP on your mom's side.
Dad's side.
Okay. Yeah, my mom's side is like Anglo, but they got here like my grandparents have British accents, so they're not like WASP. We've
Oh
talked about.
wow.
I don't think that counts. They're like Protestant Brits, but they're not. I think WASP is an American term specifically.
I don't think I don't know. That's a good question. Is
If
it
you're
is
if you are an Episcopalian Anglo, but you are in England, like you're not a WASP, right? Or are you?
but I don't know. I think you are. I think you are a wasp still.
There you go. All right, so I'm
But
half WASP.
it's a good question. It's like you don't think of those people necessarily as wasps.
Right. I
Um,
think it's an American term.
yeah, yeah, it feels like it means America, and it means sort of like the Ivy prep crowd
Yeah,
here in
old
America.
stock. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so Nate, who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you here? What you are, from what I can see, a very promising young talent in our space. I always really like talking to you. I think you have a good sense of humor. But what is your beat? Like where that's the one thing I'm not 100% clear on. Like, what is your specialty?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Right now, I guess I'm probably, I mean, I have like specific issues that I know a lot about, write about, talk about, which is like immigration, culture war stuff, that kind of thing. Like that's been my beat for a while, kind of internecine what is conservatism debates, which were honestly like hotter a couple years ago than they are now. Like everyone's kind of figured out what kind of conservative they are at this point, and everyone's kind of just doing their own thing to a certain extent. But I mean, when I was like a full-time journalist, which is like what I did when I got out of college in 2021, I was writing a lot about education, culture war stuff, etc. And then I went down to work on a presidential campaign, which didn't end fortuitously and was kind of in the wilderness for a little while. And now I'm working at this like conservative startup here in DC, America 2100, trying to get these guys off the ground and writing for a bunch of places as well. So I'm not like doing full-time journalism now. Like I'm doing kind of advocacy, a lot of writing still, like that kind of stuff. But the stuff we're working on is like we want to build like a sort of an advocacy group in DC for like a non-cucked right, which is easier said than done, right? Because like obviously, I mean, I'm sure people who watch your show know that like DC conservatism, in our circles, like our sort of concept of like what is right wing, what is left wing, et cetera. Like it's a completely different universe than in DC, where as much as there's good people in DC, like the institutional conservative movement and GOP here is not that different than it was pre-Trump, frankly. So we're kind of trying to drag them kicking and screaming to the right, which, we'll see how it goes. But so far things have been exciting. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. It definitely does. So America 2100. Yeah, I like it. I like the, our ancestors, the Twitter bio is our ancestors settled the continent, conquered a wild frontier, built beautiful cities, and sent men to the sent men to the moon. America deserves a future as great as its past. And I'm seeing this sentiment everywhere on the right. I'm seeing this beauty, power, like build American dynamism. I'm seeing this everywhere, and I'm seeing this. It's great. I mean, uh, despite being a complete schmuck and definitely not like as well pedigreed as you, I do occasionally bump into like big right wing power people, and some of these big guys have no idea. They're completely clueless to anything going on in the dissident right. They don't know who any of these people are. And that's usually what happens. I mean, that's usually the answer that you get. So it's funny how we're so in this world on Twitter that we think everybody knows like what we're doing, but they just don't. They don't equate. They're so used to being. I mean, what do you make of the right as the outer party? The right as the born losers. Do you think that that's true? You would probably know better than anybody from where you're sitting in DC. Do you think that that's true?
Yeah, well, I would say like outer party versus born losers, like beautiful losers, to use the Sam Francis phrase, like are two slightly distinct things. Because this is actually something that Sam Francis wrote a lot about in Beautiful Losers, where he was like, one of the reasons the right has just lost every single major battle since the foundation of the modern conservative movement is because, it was almost like a Marxian class analysis thing where they perceived themselves as defending these old institutions of this old ruling class that actually didn't exist anymore. So they didn't perceive their own actual constituency and their own actual interests, who were like outsiders, right? Francis called them middle American radicals. But like the sort of institutional conservative movement and its formal ideology were meant to represent like this old WASP Anglo ruling class from New England that by the time the modern conservative movement was actually formed, like was effectively dead. Like the people still exist, but the actual sort of institutions and power structures that the conservative movement was ostensibly defending and that the sort of constructed ideology of the conservative movement was devoted to protecting didn't exist anymore. They'd been replaced during the managerial revolution, the rise of the managerial elites, all the stuff that like James Burnham writes about.
Wait, so sorry, but that's actually a really fascinating point. So you're saying that it's like the ideology of conservatism was designed to protect to bring back WASPs, the WASPy class, the sort of Boston Brahmins.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time the ideology had formed enough to have adherents, that class was no longer even around anymore.
Right.
It's fascinating. Right. So where did they go?
Exactly. So they still existed, right? There's still WASPs today, like that you can, you're descended from a line of WASPs. I don't know if you're full WASP, but like
you can see them in museums. They're like,
yeah, right. Exactly. But if you go to New England, like there's still plenty of guys like Boat Shoes who like, their parents went to Ivy Leagues, they'll go to Ivy Leagues, that kind of stuff. And they're fine, right, in New England. But they were, for the first couple centuries of America, like the dominant ruling class of America, right? Like they were the ones in the governing institutions in the power centers, not just the Ivy Leagues, but like the banks, obviously the universities, academia, government, you can go down the line, right? You look at like the presidents who were at least partially WASP, right? Like for the first 2 centuries of America, overwhelming, right? So during, what James Burnham writes about during the managerial revolution, and Sam Francis was like a disciple of Burnham's, was basically that there was in Western developed nations across developed Western civilization, there was a managerial revolution happening where the old ruling class, which in Europe was like the landed aristocracies and America was the WASPs, was getting replaced by the rise of this new class of technocrats, of managerial elites who were coming to power through the bureaucratization of society. So you have the rise of mass society, everything gets bureaucratized because everything's bigger, right? You have mass multinational corporations, you have huge government bureaucracies, you have much more complex societies that need to be sort of managed and bureaucratized. And what happens is that means you wrest power away from like the old capitalists, right? Like the Rockefellers and, like the Henry Fords and that type of sort of old capitalist ruling class. And instead, the power is vested in the HR departments, the boards, the government bureaucracy, right? Like, as we know from the Trump administration, the president doesn't really make the calls anymore in the executive branch a lot of the times. So the power was transferred from, the professors in the Ivy Leagues who are WASPs and the faculty and the capitalist, entrepreneurs who created businesses to the bureaucracies in their institutions. And therefore, there was actually like a revolutionary transfer of power from that old ruling class to the managerial elites. And conservatives, and again, this is something the Marxists are kind of right about, which is that like oftentimes ideology is in part a expression of the interests of a ruling class. The constructed conservative ideology of the 50s onwards was an expression of this old WASP ruling class, their worldview, their values, their beliefs. And there was nothing to defend anymore. They were gone. And Francis's point, and this was why Francis supported Pat Buchanan and would have supported Trump in 2016, is that there is actually a mass constituency for a new kind of nationalism, a new kind of right-wing politics in America, which is like predominantly white, middle Americans, in the sort of literally in the middle of the country, in the middle class. They're neither upper class nor welfare dependent underclass, who are the ones who are really getting squeezed by the new managerial regime, which is this coalition of elites and a welfare-dependent urban underclass. But the right didn't know how to speak to them because the expressed ideology of the right wasn't speaking for their interests. So that was a long monologue, but that's the basic.
No, I love how you brought that around. I'm not super familiar with Burnham. I've never read Rise of the Managerial Class. I mean, so that book, you've obviously read it.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the genesis of his argument? I mean, where does he start this process? Because as you're saying, it's not that the WASPs are gone, although it sure does feel like they're gone, but it's that they were replaced. They were kind of landed gentry, and then they got replaced by city managers, city technocrats, as you're saying, or industrial crats, whatever, before what we think of as tech today. But isn't that in a way exactly what they wanted? Because I'm sure these landed gentries were all about meritocracy, right? I mean, that was the system set up by them. These universities were set up by them, right? Mm-hmm. So where did they actually go, according to him? Or, just what is Burnham's basic, thesis?
Well, his thesis was that there was and he wrote, I think the Managerial Revolution came out in like the 40s. I might have, or maybe even earlier. I'm annoyed that I don't remember the specific date, but it was early. It was like in the first half of the 20th century. And he totally called it. But what he was noticing that it took like the rest of the world, another 50 or 60 years to figure out was that there was a revolution happening under the West's feet, a totally bloodless revolution in this case, but a revolution in the technical sense of the term, which is a transfer of power from one regime, right, in the old sense of the word, right, a ruling system to another. In some cases you did have actual like clashes between like the old WASPs, who were not totally meritocrats. I mean, they were meritocratic in their disposition, but like there were quotas at the Ivy Leagues, right? Like our Jewish half, like only a certain amount of us could get into the Ivy Leagues. Like there were country clubs where you could only get in if you were a WASP. Like they did have like these institutional barriers to protect, like any ruling class does, right? Like, and the WASPs, I think, were much more ecumenical than most other ruling classes. But the point was like, they weren't totally meritocratic. They had a sense of vested interest that they defended. But because of this, this sweeping systemic change to literally the shape of a society where every company now had a huge bureaucracy, every government agency now had a huge bureaucracy. I mean, the number of bureaucrats in the government went from like 100 at the time of like the founding to like tens of thousands, right, over the course of the sort of New Deal era and World War II. And it became a thing where, because of the government bureaucracy, every private institution had to have a bureaucracy too. It wasn't just big business. It was
That's
like the
interesting.
arts, the museums had a bureaucracy now, right?
Yeah, yeah,
If you
yeah,
start
yeah.
a poetry club, you have a bureaucracy. Like all of these things were downstream. And then when you have this growing government bureaucracy to comply with the new regulations, you had to have like lawyers on file, right? To like make sure you were in compliance with the Americans with Disability Act, et cetera, right? So the
yeah.
WASPs, they were just kind of pushed out because they weren't the centers of power anymore.
You know, my favorite anecdote about this is what happened with airport lounges.
Mm.
So airport lounges used to be gentlemen's clubs,
Mm-hmm.
they're not strip clubs, like clubs for
Actual,
gentlemen.
yeah.
And you know, they were like, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to like the California Club in LA or the Jonathan Club, you know, there's, or, you know, like even like the New York Athletic Club or the Yale Club in New York, you know, these types of places that it's the old kind of explorers, vaguely English, you know, giant elephant head on the wall type of thing.
Mm.
And that's what airport lounges used to be. Like airport lounges used to be, you had to be invited only by the force of your reputation in the community. You didn't have to pay, you know, it was just like you were a gentleman of the community and
Mm-hmm.
you went to the airport and you got to go to the sick airport lounge, right? And it was like, and of course, uh, a guy who had a very bad reputation but a lot of money sued for like religious discrimination
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Oh, well, why can't I be part of the lounge?" And then within 10 years, the FAA had, or whoever, I think it maybe is another admin body, but some other type of admin body had completely erased every airport lounge and made it pay to play only, and
Yeah.
given it over to Amex and, you know, whoever runs these lounges now, and made it so that, oh, there has to be a price that you pay. And, you know, now you go to these lounges and they're just like a disgusting free for
Mm-hmm.
all, you know?
Yeah, that is like that's
Yeah.
a perfect example. Like that's didn't know that, but that's like that is like the essence of like what happened over like 60 or 70 years in the 20th century. Like that what you're just I mean, it might be a particularly like potent example, but like that process happened time and time and time again in all of these little things that you wouldn't have even thought of, like airport lounge, where you had these old I mean, the like derogatory term is like a good old boys club, right? I mean, I don't think I think it's a lot of them were good, and I think it's tragic that they're gone. But like you had these old like folk ways almost, like you had sort of ways of associating with one another that were exclusive by necessity, and that were the sort of purview of a certain class. And there were all these like unspoken traditions, you know, delicate traditions that arose around it. Like, how do you get invited to the airport lounge? You have to know someone, you have to have gone golfing together, your kids go to school, whatever, right? And the bureaucracy just comes in and standardizes everything because that's what bureaucracies do, right? Where you have a set of rules, they're enforced. It doesn't do well with all of these kind of like contradictory, complex traditions. So that's an amazing story. I didn't know that, but it's a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. I remember when I read it, I was like, this is the perfect, like, this is like a microcosm of the
Yeah.
entire Western world. But can't we blame a little bit the WASPs themselves? I mean, isn't it, if you look at the WASPs today, and I know this from my own family, they certainly seem to have wanted to give up. You know, so few of them have any vigor for
Yeah.
hanging on. You know, I have many familial examples of this, but even the old waspy families, like the ones with the identifiable names, they give all their money to progressive
Yeah.
causes. You know, it's some woman left at the end of the, you know, there's some woman at the very end. She's the last one left, and she's controlling billions of dollars, and she gives all of it. She, you know, she gives 100% of it to LGBTQ plus.
Yeah.
You know, so like, why do they have such self hatred?
Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, like a lot of them now at least are political liberals. Like just, you know, they vote for Democrats, they donate to Democrats, they're partisan liberal Democrats, whatever, right? They're not, I mean, there is a difference. They're like the reason, like Massachusetts, I lived there for like 7 years. My parents were there, like when I was a kid, is by far the best governed blue state in the country because most of my childhood I grew up in Oregon, which is like the worst governed state in the country, right?
Yeah.
And they're both Democratic supermajorities, but there is like, in some ways, there is this like last remaining remnant of like this old sort of commonsensical waspy disposition where like even their liberalism is like different than West Coast liberalism, which is like way more deranged, you know, like they're liberals. And, you know, maybe this will fade away too, because it'll just sort of collapse in on itself. But they like, you know, they get married, they stay married, they have kids, they're kids that don't commit crimes, they go to good schools. And it kind of perpetuates, like you've got these values and these folkways that are sort of still like possessed within them, even though they're liberal. And that means you can have a Democratic supermajority state like Massachusetts, which actually like does pretty well for the most part in sociological terms. But I think like you're exactly right that some of what made the WASPs, I think, an extremely effective and successful ruling class for 200 years, and in some ways like made America what it was, you know, this global superpower, was also sort of, it had this like poison pill written into it that ended up being their own destruction. Like WASPs were this kind of like small L liberal in like the old sense, like ecumenical, curious kind of like that was like the character, right? You know, I mean, religious tolerance, religious liberty, like those American institutions, that was a WASP thing, you know? And
tolerance, right?
Right,
It's like,
right.
that's such a waspy idea.
Exactly. And it doesn't, to be clear, like what they were talking about isn't what tolerance means today.
No,
right?
of course not. But it's been used to, it's been, right. It's
Exactly.
like been used as that. Yeah.
Yes. So their own sort of formal expressed ideology and their way of viewing the world, which had served them and America so well for 2 centuries or more, didn't have like a built-in defense mechanism against like the more radical challenge, right? Like, so because they were ecumenical and tolerant and open, etc., like when the radicals showed up, you know, when the barbarians were at the gates, there were no, you know, defenses, and that
quite literally in now today. Yeah, wow. So yeah, actually, let's talk about immigration a little bit. That's a good segue. So this is something I'm actually endlessly curious about. When in the Ellis Island years, what were the laws of immigration? Because from what I understand, they were pretty few and far between. There actually wasn't, it was sort of like show up, and if you make it, you get naturalized and you're good. And then maybe there's like a Chinese quota here or there, but like it was pretty much like, hey, we want you, come on over. Is that true?
Yeah, there were like, I mean, one thing that like mass migration chills like always point to is like, well, you know, at the time of the founding, there weren't any immigration restrictions. And it was like, yeah, I mean, because you didn't need any, right? Like
because you wanted everybody. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And also like there was, you know, starting pretty early on, like racial laws about immigration. I mean, they specifically say like white, you know, in their law about who can come over and, you know, what the regulations are or whatever. So obviously most of the people coming over during the Ellis Island, almost all of them were European, right? Like, so they met that quota. Although I think like Southern Italians weren't necessary. I mean, there's like debate over whether they
where did they, was that a law that the Southern Italians?
I don't think it was a law, but it was like the WASPs like hated Southern Italians. I mean, they hated Italians in general. There's all kinds of like hilariously dated like screeds written by like these like brown, you know, like
Sicilian gangsters.
Yeah, exactly. But like so it's true that like during the Ellis Island, one of the things that enabled Ellis Island was the fact that like the laws were much more permissive then. But then there was literally like a 40-year pause in immigration. There was an act passed like that sort of was the final punctuation mark at the end of the Ellis Island era, where they just said no more immigration. And they shut down immigration, and there was like effectively no net immigration for 40 years until the 1965, you know, the Hart-Celler, which, you know, not only legalized like immigration at much larger scale, but also listed the nation of origin caps, which were effectively like racial caps, right? So that was like there was this famous line where Ted Kennedy says, "This will not change the racial composition of the country." And then, you know, of course, obviously immediately did. But like, but that was sort of, there was this Ellis Island era that was a lot of immigration. and then we shut everything down for 40 years and
Wow.
gave
So
people
what
a
year was that we shut off immigration?
It was Coolidge. So I wish I knew I mean I've failed to recall two specific dates now, and we've been going for like 15 minutes. But
It's fine, it's fine.
it was the 20s, I think. I'd have to
Immigration Act of 1924.
Nice.
Was
Nailed
that it?
Yeah. Yep. So that was, so if you look at, I mean, nobody talks about this now, especially not on like the pro-immigration types. Like they'll always talk about Ellis Island, and they'll never talk about the fact that then there was literally no net migration into America for 40 years after
That's
that.
crazy.
If you look at the graph of immigration rates, Ellis Island's like this, and then it goes like this, and it's flat until 1965.
So what prompted that? Do you know what prompted that the total cease?
Yeah, people were like pissed about how many people were coming into the country, and the fact that like the people already here who were like predominantly WASPs, they didn't like Catholics, right? There's all these hilarious like anti-Catholic cartoons of like this like they almost look like anti-Semitic cartoons, like in like these like this like scheming Pope like papist, like trying to subvert America. But so they didn't like they were, the people who are here were Protestants. So like, this is a Protestant country. They didn't like Catholics. They thought that they were going to be loyal to the Pope rather than America. It's like an early like dual loyalty, claim. They didn't like Italians, right? They didn't like, they saw like these like white ethnics, quote unquote, who are coming over from Europe as like lesser than the WASPs. Pretty standard, like, standard issue kind of nativism. It was but to be fair, like there were not bad reasons for feeling that way. Because we talk about Ellis Island as this wonderful moment in American history of like how open we are. And like a lot of the people who came over ended up becoming productive members of American society. So like in retrospect, it wasn't the worst thing ever. But people like forget how much chaos it caused. Like you had all of a sudden the formation of all these gangs, the Italian mafia, the Irish gangs, like the Jewish gangs, the Eastern European gangs, and they like took over the cities and they bribed all the cops on their payroll. And there were like turf wars in the city. Like it caused an enormous amount of havoc. And you had like Italian ghettos, right? Like, so there were like actually huge issues that were caused by this huge influx of immigration from countries and peoples that were not like the WASPs who were there. They were much closer kind of culturally and demographically to the WASPs than the people coming in now are to us, but they were still different enough that a huge influx was a big deal. And you had to shut down immigration for 40 years to give them like a generation and a half to assimilate. And the problem now is we have even more people coming in than we did then from even more different, far more different backgrounds. And we're not going to shut down immigration. We're just going to keep piling more and more on. So it's like at least 300% worse than Ellis Island. That's my exact math.
Did you ever see Gangs of New York?
Yeah, I did. I remember really liking it, but now I can't remember anything about it. It was on Netflix. Yeah.
No. Gangs of New York was a Scorsese movie before this.
Oh, wait, never mind. Okay, never mind. I didn't see it. Sorry.
It's before the streaming era.
Mhm.
And it's Daniel Day-Lewis plays Bill the Butcher, who's a nativist American in New York City. And he's a bad guy, but he's like, now looking back, he's like the best. And he's fighting the Catholic Irish. And it's like Tammany Hall era New York City, and they're killing each other on the streets. And he wraps himself in an American flag, and one of his eyes has gotten taken out, and he replaces it with like an eagle, an American eagle. And he's supposed to be totally the bad guy, but it's like watching that movie now, you're just like, yeah, Billy, like, come on, like he's the best. So yeah, I think that's the era you're talking about. It's like the Gangs of New York era, which I guess that lasted, that sort of like ethnic Ellis Island battle era. Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess it must have lasted all the way till the 20s, and they just had enough, and they were like, all right, we gotta cut this off.
Now that you mention it, I was getting like the documentary and the movie mixed up, but there's this famous clip of Daniel Day-Lewis from Gangs of New York where he's it wasn't Gangs of New York, but there's this famous clip on the same line where there's this old WASP guy, and he's at the house of some like white ethnic. It's during the Ellis Island era, and the white ethnic is like, like the Jews have their people, the Italians have their mother country, you know, the Catholics have the church. What do you have? And he's like, America.
Yeah, we
We're
have the United
like
States
you,
of
the rest
America.
of you are just visiting. And I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, it's the rest of you are just visiting. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's Matt Damon
right.
saying that to Joe Pesci
Okay, there you
in
go.
a movie called The Good Shepherd, which is about like the founding of the CIA.
Yes,
And
yeah, okay, yeah.
yeah, that's way later on though. I think that takes place in the. I mean, when was the CIA founded? I don't even know. Like the
Good
40s,
question. Yeah.
30s. So yeah, yeah, and then Matt Damon to save the country throws his own son out of an airplane. That's how you
Oh,
know he's committed to the American cause. Yeah, no, I love that scene. I always remember that scene. It's a different movie.
the rest of you are just, I mean, that's just such a hard line. The
Yeah,
rest.
so that's what you're saying. But sadly, again, I think as we're saying, those wasps have given up. They
Yeah.
really yeah, it's like something, it's like the immune system that allowed them to take over the world was also the immune system that allowed them to fail in a way. And it was just like it just is overwhelming. So all right, so that brings us to 1920. We freeze everything till I guess what we're going to talk about is the Immigration Act of what
Five.
remind everybody talks about this. What is that?
It's Hart Seller,
Oh yeah,
1965.
yeah, right.
Yeah. So that I mean, first of all, it just like opened it up for like a free for all. But the one of the most significant things it did, but beyond like lifting caps on the amount of immigration, is it lifted the nation of origin restrictions, right? It had traditionally been like European countries that you were allowed to come from. And it was pitched to voters at the time, to the American people, as like, this isn't going to change the ethnic, racial composition. I don't know what's going on with my
Yeah,
uh, new
you're
camera. It'll focus in a
no,
sec. So.
very few people watch. Most people listen.
Okay, good.
I don't. Most people don't watch it, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
But
it'll figure it out. But the it changed like it was pitched as like, I mean, there's this infamous line from Ted Kennedy where he was like, "This isn't going to change the ethnic composition of the country," but by changing the nation of origin cap, it like almost immediately opened it up to third world immigration. And that's kind of where the fruits of that are very much still with us today.
And why was that? Why was that passed? Why was the 60s? I mean, obviously, this is the hippies and Civil Rights Act is right at the same time. So obviously, it's kind of the liberal takeover. But how do we get there? Does this? Obviously, there's the 19th Amendment. I'm sure that had something to do with it. And then there's FDR, right? Who, I think some think he's kind of the beginning of all this. So how did we become so senselessly liberal, progressive by the 60s?
Well, I mean, the Burnhamite like explanation, and I'm basically a Burnhamite, I guess, is that like managerialism, which is an ideology, it's the official, just like sort of a kind of like waspy small c conservatism. It wasn't called conservatism back then, was kind of like the ruling ideology of the ancien regime in America, of the old ruling class. Like managerialism was the ideology of the new elites. And it's inherently liberal because it hates like difference. It hates distinction. It has this kind of egalitarianism written into it because if you're a bureaucrat, all of the old kind of traditions, the old distinctions, the differences between men and women, between different races, between different religions, like all of the things that distinguish one group of humans from another, it gets in the way. You like homogenous populations that are easy to manage, that are easy to kind of like bureaucratize, et cetera. So and this was, I mean, the 60s revolution obviously injected managerialism with a kind of social radicalism that made it far more like aggressively and militantly left wing. But even prior to that, like the managerialism that kind of took hold in the wake of the New Deal was liberal in its outlook, right? Because it wanted to wipe away these kind of like what it saw as like irrational distinctions or prejudices in the sort of American system. And that started well before the 60s, decades before the 60s.
And how does it relate to communism? How does that push for deracinated managerialism where everybody's a cog. And yeah, anything that's not market, anything you can't build a market around. So like
Mhm.
marriage
Mhm.
is something that they don't like because it makes it harder. It gives people irrational ties that they can't really control, whereas they want complete cogs,
Yep.
complete access to labor.
Mhm.
But in a way, communism also exists as a reaction to that. But I mean, we kind of also think of communism as the cause of this attitude as well. So how does communism and managerialism like intertwine?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like, I mean, Burnham was kind of like a right-wing Marxist, like in a way, like his analysis of society and of the sort of systematic changes in like the material conditions of society were, I mean, he was a Marxist before he moved right, but he retained this kind of Marxian way of looking at the world. But there are like out and out Marxists who kind of like Burnham and like his theory because they see, not totally inaccurately, managerialism as a kind of like managed capitalism, which it basically is. Like managerialism was a system that was between full socialism and full kind of like free market capitalism, where you have a degree of freedom and you don't have a complete government control of things, but everything is bureaucratized, and like the real seat of power in society is in the bureaucracies and in the class of people who kind of like move fluidly through the bureaucracies, both private
Like
and
the universities. Yeah, it's like like
exactly.
buy into the managerial class from you got to do
Yes.
it early to like get in there. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes
Yes,
sense.
and that's like the important thing to understand is like the managerial revolution. This was one of the places where like official conservative ideology was like a century too late. Like official or managerialism, the managerial revolution like wiped away the old distinctions between like public and private, right? Like the idea that there's the government and then there's the private sector like doesn't actually describe how America works anymore.
No, that's
Oh,
very true. And it's amazing to me that conservatives are the dumbest on that.
yeah.
I still meet conservatives, like Midwestern conservatives who are like, I just don't want the government interacting with my company. And I'm like, it's all one thing, dude. There's
Yeah.
no difference
Yeah.
between, maybe Home Depot is like the one because they're kind of conservative, but like there's no difference between Best Buy and the government. It's the
Right.
same thing, basically.
Well, and
Yeah.
even Home Depot has like thousands of pages of like compliance documents and like an
Yeah. Oh,
entire on-staff bureaucracy that they have on retainer to like, like they're effective in some ways, like all these big companies are like arms of, if not like the government, then the managerial regime, which is like both public and private, right? Like that's who they answer to. They're not
yeah.
really like a private business in the old sense of the word.
Just to test this, I just Googled Home Depot LGBTQ or Home Depot expands partnership with
There you
Human
go.
Rights Campaign
Yep.
Foundation. They're giving money to HBCUs and
There you
LGBTQ
go.
programs. So
Yeah.
the idea that Home Depot is its own organization that has its own beliefs is
Right.
completely wrong, even though it's
And
like
they're doing that
supposedly right wing.
because that's like what their shareholders want, and that's what like
Why are
there's
they doing it? It's so
regulations, like
yeah,
all of
yeah.
this stuff. It's all the same. That's what's important to understand. Is like it's all the same class of people. Like the quote unquote managerial elites, like they move between public and private bureaucracies. Like there's no distinction at
Oh
all,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, like Biden, like when he was staffing his people, this was one thing the libertarians are right about is like the concept of regulatory capture, where like all of these major regulatory bureaucracies that are supposed to regulate specific industries, like they're people who worked for the industries in bureaucracies there, and then they go to the regulatory agency where they're supposed to be overseeing them, and then they go, after they're done there, they go right back to the specific company they're supposed to be regulating, right? So like, they've got hands in both pots, as it
Well,
were.
and it seems like all that they do is go after like the bad guy industries of like tobacco and oil. Like those
Yeah.
are the only like they don't actually regulate anything at all besides tobacco and oil,
Yeah.
which they like
And
way over regulate because
right,
those
they
are like the
regulate those
bad
guys out of
ones.
existence. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. So okay, so you're an Ivy Leaguer, right? Ivy
No,
League?
no, I
Oh,
went
you're
to a
not.
liberal arts college in Colorado Springs.
Oh, really? Okay, I thought you were an Ivy League guy.
I was a
But
terrible student in high school, so I wasn't going to
really?
be. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you come to be? I mean, it seems like you're kind of you are not a managerial elite, but you're certainly aware of these things, and you're certainly kind of adjacent. You're in DC.
Yeah.
So how did you?
I probably am part of the class, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're a think tank in
Yeah.
DC. I mean, that's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
basically what it is.
Mhm.
So how does this class think of itself? You know, like, first of all, why are they all gay? Every single one of them is gay. I have a friend, I really can't say anything specific at all, but he said the other day, yeah, the State Department is 100% gay men, women, and
Yeah.
cucked like straight men. And
Yeah.
it's true. You feel it when you go to DC. I went to college in DC. You can feel, you know, I've been there several times recently. You go to a party in one of these rooms, you just feel like every dude in there is gay.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like, why did that happen?
That's the joke about like Republican I mean, it's a joke, but it's also like true. Like every third Republican Hill staffer is a gay guy. Like
Yeah.
that's not really an exaggeration. I mean, it probably is a little bit, but like it's crazy how many gay guys work in like socially conservative, Republican offices. Anyways, sorry I interrupted you.
No, you didn't at all. Wait, but like, why is that? Why has it become so gay? And why, you know, how does this like managerial elite think of itself? Like, is it aware of any of this, or it just is kind of going about its business?
Well, like most, one like thing that conservatives do, especially conservatives outside of DC, that I like doesn't totally make sense to me is they like talk about the regime, the managerial elites, whatever, as if it's like this like self-conscious conspiracy where they are, getting together in a room conspiracizing to like destroy America. And like there is some of that, like absolutely. But a lot of these guys like genuinely think they're doing the right thing, right? They genuinely think that they're like they have a set of political values which are totally insane values from our perspective and totally insane policy ideas, but are like they have a conviction that like this is what is good for humanity, this is what is good for the world. Less so these days what is good for America, because they're like not, they're cosmopolitans just fundamentally in their disposition, but like humanitarianism, egalitarianism, like these values, like these are the good values that we need to pursue. And like I said, like that to an extent, that is written into like managerialism as a worldview just because of their sort of social position in a bureaucracy. But it was also like the 60s shaped this class and their ideas and their worldview in ways that are impossible to overstate. And like all of the major elite universities that these guys go to, all of the social circles they run in, the media they consume, like all of that stuff is in some ways like the child of the 60s. And 60s leftism is much more hard-edged and much gayer literally than like the pre kind of 60s managerialism.
Yeah, totally. So, okay, so then where is it going to go from here? I mean, I love what you're doing with your think tank, and I really, you mentioned earlier that there is this room for this new type of American conservatism, although I wouldn't even call it conservatism. It's probably the wrong word for it. So, I've heard everybody in DC reads BAP. I like, it seems like, I remember the dark Biden meme. Like,
Yeah.
that was so obviously made on purpose. Like, that was so obviously made by a bunch of, gay kids on Adderall in a room, and girls. And they were like, oh, we should make, like, let's troll the right. And it kind of worked, actually. I mean, it was so stupid, but, they're aware of this stuff. I've heard that the kind of DC right-wing people are into Nikki Haley, which seems completely insane. I mean, like, do they have no dignity? It's like these right-wing people, they're like, how can they not understand what's happening? And
Yeah.
what are you doing differently?
Well, one thing is there's a huge, like, gaping generational divide on the right, including in DC. That like I think like the conservative institutions, which are still like controlled by older conservatives, like they have no idea what's coming. I mean, it's crazy because like if you talk to the older conservatives, not all of them, right? But like the ones at like legacy institutions like American Enterprise Institute or like in GOP offices, a lot of them are like Nikki Haley, whatever types, right? Like the worst kind of like parody of a Con Inc. kind of like apparatchik. And there are like young people like that too, obviously. Like there's young people of any disposition, but like the young guys in DC on the right are right wing, like really right wing. And like you talked about, like every kid under age of 30 in the Trump administration had a copy of Bronze Age Mindset, right? Like a lot of like I mean, it's funny. I like accidentally gave the game away. I thought that was like conventional knowledge. Like everyone knew that. And I was in an interview with the New York Times like a few years ago. And I said in passing, I was like, like every kid under the age of 30, like in the Trump administration's like reads Bronze Age Pervert. And they like printed that and it became this like big thing where they're like, he admits, like, like
that was you?
that was me.
That was you who said that. I'm talking to the guy who said that.
I thought that was cool. I didn't mean to like dox. I mean, I didn't dox anyone, right?
No,
I thought everyone knew that. I thought that had been printed before. Apparently, like no one had said that.
Oh, that was
like if you're a young conservative, you see that's like obvious, right? But to the left, I mean, they had a field day with it. Like everyone was like posting that quote. But that's the thing is like you talk to young guys here. Again, not all of them, right? There's like guys who aren't like part of that milieu. But like the people who are going to take over the legacy institutions on the right, including in DC, like are like more radical than I think even most conservatives in DC know. And I don't think, I mean, the left has written about it a little bit and they're kind of like mouthpiece outlets, but I don't think that they know what's coming in like 20 years, because it is going to be like a seismic shift when you have a generational changing of the guard here.
Well, it's going to have to sort of shear in two, right? Because it's like the one side can't tolerate the other side, it seems like. I mean, although BAP has now come out as pro-trans, so maybe now it can be together. Where are you at on that? I mean, this is the question on everybody's mind.
I don't actually like read BAP religiously. Like, so, I mean, I saw the thing, like, I don't get it. Like, I mean, I try to be like an ecumenicalist about this stuff. Like the guys in DC, like it's not just guys who read BAP. Like there's other kinds of, hard right types as well. But so like there's different sort of factions within that. But like in general, like the broad sort of like milieu consensus is a kind of dissident rightist perspective on the world. And it's not specifically Baptist or specifically anything else. But it is much closer to like what I believe in, certainly. And what I think you believe in, and most of the people we know believe in, than it is to like the stuff you're hearing from the GOP right now.
Yeah. Well, so where are you at on the TQ though? Where are you at on this? Are you
I mean, I'm like
a
social conservative. So I think it's totally like, I think it's insane to even suggest the right should give any ground on this.
It really sure is.
If we like surrender on this, like what else is left to surrender on?
That's my position. I mean, I think BAPS, and look, I don't want to. What I would like to keep this discussion with me publicly with anybody is non-accusatory. I'm not saying like BAP or Ren, who published the tranny picture. I'm not saying any of these people are, like we should throw them under the bus and forget about them. I mean, even Red Scare, thank God for Red Scare. We wouldn't be allowed to say gay in public if it wasn't for Red Scare. So thank God. I'm not trying to throw any of these people under the bus, but what's missed in all this like infighting and back and forth and all this bullshit drama that just makes me like never want to go on Twitter ever is what's the actual ruling here? Like, what's the actual principle? Like, is a dime square party or BAP, is it hypocritical for them to promote a transsexual? This is the question. And I don't mean, in a like personal sense or like, they're wrong or they're bad or they're gay. It's just like genuinely in terms of the abstract ideological question. What is wrong with having a tranny around? And I think that BAP kind of said, well, what's the difference with having a gay person around? It's also a made up identity, like what's really the difference?
I agree with that, by the way. Like, I also think that you shouldn't be promoting like homosexuality, but sorry, go ahead.
No, but I just love to hear you. Like, why is it wrong? It's a very hard question to answer, actually. It's not that simple. Like, you're right. It's a gut feeling. And the gut feeling is the most important thing. And we totally should not abandon the gut feeling. But in a higher minded way, like, why was it wrong?
So like I have my answer, which is in some ways like a more conventional social conservative answer with some twists. But like just as an aside, one of my, and again, this isn't like an accusatory thing to anyone. I want to be ecumenical in general. Like I like all of those guys. One of my sort of confusions about, or one of the reasons I would not like associate myself like in an ideological faction way with like Dime Square stuff, even the BAP stuff to an extent, is like there's a substantial amount of sort of ideological incoherence into like what their political project is. Like they have clear policy views on certain issues, right? Some of it's shit posting. I don't know if this is a cuss podcast or not.
Definitely a cuss podcast.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, but so like some of it's just like shit posting or whatever. Some of it's like tongue in cheek stuff, which is all fine, right? But like I'm in DC, so like as much as I'm interested in that stuff and I care about it, like, and I write about it, etc. Like I do think in terms of like concrete political programs to an extent, and like what is a Baptist political program?
Yeah,
right. Like,
right.
you
Well,
know,
I
I'm
think
not
he
really
would
sure.
agree with that. I think he would probably see there is no Baptist, you know, join a pirate ship and go, you know, raid the villages along the Aegean would be his, you know, or even more practically go join up with some kind of Wagner group, right? I mean, I think that's probably what he would say is his,
which is like, okay, you know, you do you, man, but like that's how am I supposed to take that in DC and be like, this is our policy program, right? Like this is our project 2025 or whatever. So that's to answer that question is like, okay, so why from that perspective is like promoting, you know, some transgender kid like bad, right? Like I don't necessarily know that you could explain why from that perspective it's bad. For me, it's like a bunch of different stuff. The most basic one is just that like men and women are real, right? And that like transgenderism fundamentally is a lie, which is that you can change your gender and like that's wrong and we shouldn't promote it. More broadly, like, I mean, it's a kind of social degeneracy, a kind of social deviancy. And also like, and this is, you were talking about like the tagline that I wrote for America 2100 about like, you know, our ancestors conquered a continent, you know, like they built great cities, they sent men to the moon. Like the old conservative understanding of it, because I am a patriot, like I do love this country. I think some of the DR like anti-Americanism stuff, like it.
Oh, many of them. I think they don't really like America at all, which is, I agree. I'm like actually a fully American. Exactly. I tried to get I've never wanted a tattoo. I tried to get an American flag tattoo.
Oh yeah.
But you know, it's really hard. Like it's not easy. Like you have to get it. It has to be really big because the stars are super small. I wanted like a little one. Yeah. But you have to get like a big, like, and it would look like I was trying to say it because I think it's like the black American flag is like a Marines thing. So I didn't want people to like, I didn't want like stolen valor accusations. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I was like, I can't get like I just wanted like a little one, but it's like really hard for them to do. But anyway, sorry, continue.
No, that's interesting. I'll keep that in mind if I ever think about getting a tattoo. But like I actually like A, I love this country, and B, like I think like was whatever, like a great country that was capable of great and miraculous things. But the problem with like the conventional kind of mainstream conservative understanding of like American greatness is it's this like abstract principles like individual liberty and the Federalist Papers and the Constitution. And like I like the Federalist Papers and the Constitution, but like the deeper roots of American greatness like are that we were conquerors and we are a settler colonial nation which sent people out onto the Western frontier to take it and to build
manifest destiny. You know,
manifest destiny
is the most American thing.
Exactly.
You know, just sorry to interrupt. I actually want to hear more about what you say about this, but like the two masterpiece books written in my generation, as I would say, I think I'm significantly older than you, but our American Pastoral, which was written in 1996 by Philip Roth, which is all about Ellis Islands. It's all about Ellis Islanders, and it's about the impossibility of true assimilation, right? And how everybody actually wants to be a WASP, like deep down, and like you know, the Jews can't really assimilate. And it's got this character in it named Mary, who's the Mishling daughter of the main guy, who's this Jew who really tries to assimilate. And he does a perfect job of it. And then he has this daughter who becomes a revolutionary because she's fat and she blows up a post office. as part of like the Weather Underground. And it
Uh-huh.
is just the most perfect American story ever. So that's one. And then two is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy,
Mhm.
which is Manifest Destiny.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like those two things are America. It's like we are conquerors and we're Manifest Destiny. And we also have this like virulent, self-destructive
Yes.
tolerance at the same
100%.
time. You know, and it's like, yeah.
Well, and that's, I've made this point before, like everything I love about America and that I think makes it not just great, but like uniquely great in important ways, like they are virtues that are double-edged swords and have their own unique pathologies, right? So we are the most insane people in the history of the world, right? Like, and insane in ways that can be enormously self-destructive, right? But have also made us capable of, you know, dreaming bigger, going further, gazing higher than any other nation or people in human history, right? Like, I mean, there's so many hilarious anecdotes from history that like illustrate this. Like one of my favorites is this pilot who like drunkenly got in a bet that he couldn't land his plane like in the middle of Times Square like during rush hour and like did it like and then got arrested and then 3 years later got in another drunken argument where the guy was like, I don't believe you did that, so he did it again. Like Americans are insane. So like but like that insanity is also the ability and the willingness to like go further, right? To go out west, Lewis and Clark, right? Like, you know, the settlers, all of that stuff. And then to build like skyscrapers are an American creation. Airplanes are an American creation. The internet is an American creation. Something like 90% of the inventions that invented the modern world were either invented in America or perfected as technology created elsewhere in America. Like that's who we are. We're visionaries, right?
Dude,
So
the motion picture,
right.
the blues,
Yeah.
rock and roll. I mean, literally everything, you know,
Yeah.
everything that is powerful in the world, it comes from here. Very, very
100%.
few.
Everything that mattered in the world, if it didn't
Spotify is the
if it
first invention that is Spotify from Sweden is the first invention that is
Spotify's
not
from Sweden, I
American.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
like the
American
first thing the
decline.
Europeans have invented ever.
Yeah, but that is true. Like obviously we are like a European country, but like we are a country founded and settled by the people from the old world where like the walls were too high and the restrictions were too much from the old world, right? The most adventurous, the most eccentric dreamers from the old world. Like, so you have some European character, obviously, to America as a European nation, but it is the Europeans who were too creative, too dynamic, you know, too boundary pushing for the old world. Like that's what America was built by. And I'm just like the low ceilings of like the old conservative patriotism, where it's about like the principles of individual liberty and free markets. Like I don't get it. Like that's not what America. I mean, in some ways it's what America is, but like that's not the essence of American greatness from my estimation. So I forget why I went on this rampage, but that's my American
Something
patriotism.
about the TQ. I don't know how
Oh yeah.
how that got
Oh,
there, but I
oh,
think it
okay. I got it now. So just to like round that all the way back, like, so I have like the basic conservative reasons for being against like promoting transgenderism, but the final one is that like it is in some ways like the final frontier of like the feminization of American society, where we are literally we've already feminized all these male spaces. We've removed like these essentially American masculine virtues from the public square. And now we are literally going to suck the testosterone out of men's bodies itself, right? Like that's the final reason to be against transgenderism, is it is robbing the last aspect and the most essential aspect of manliness from American men. So
yeah.
that plus the fact that it's fake are the reasons I'm against it.
Well, and there's and I don't know if we're allowed to talk about Dugan, but I don't know if did you see Dugan on Tucker?
Yeah, I only watched the first 20 minutes, so I
Yeah.
didn't see like the whole thing.
No, I
But
think there only was 20 minutes.
oh,
Or
well, in
what?
that case, I watched the first half, so I don't know
I
however it
think
was.
there was only like 20 minutes of it, unless because it was taken down from everywhere. It's totally not on
Oh,
Spotify.
really? There's
Yeah, it's
nukes?
not on anything. It's only on Twitter
Hmm.
because they must have just removed it from everywhere else. But I only can find 20 minutes of it. Um, and you know, Dugan keeps saying this thing about everything optional, everything optional.
Hmm.
You know, like everything about your identity should be, according to the liberalized global order,
Yeah.
everything about your identity is optional. Your
Mhm.
sex, your nationality,
Yeah.
your everything about you should be your individual decision. and your individual decision should never be infringed in any way, right? Like that's the triumph of global liberalism. And it's actual literal hell because yeah, you can chop your dick off and call yourself a woman. You can, say that you love the Thai people and really are, a Thai. Oh, I love Thai food, but you're just sitting in your room by yourself, jerking off to, you're just making selections. You're not actually living. You're not living with your people in any way. And, I think another word for that is biologically is bio-Leninism, which I've heard some people use. I think I'm probably not even using it correctly, but the trans thing to me comes to, it's like a trans person is not, I mean, the gay thing, what BAP is saying about the gay identity being also a performance, I kind of agree. But the ultimate manifestation of transhumanism and of bio-Leninism is the trans person, right? They are saying that there is no tie to the actual earth and to actual nature and to the things about yourself that you cannot change, right? They're saying that, nope, everything is optional. I can be whatever I want to be. There's no hierarchy. There's no rules. I get to decide. Only me gets to decide, even on the most cosmic, metaphysical, spiritual level, that I am a woman, right?
Yep.
And it's just not beyond it being, disgusting. It's just not true. It's not reality. And it's also like very anti-God. Now, the problem is that what BAP says, or what all these people are saying, is they acknowledge all that. They say, yeah, that's all true. But this person is mentally ill. And therefore, as a mentally ill person, we hang out with all kinds of mentally ill person. What's different with this one? Like what is different about them? Like, what do you think? Like if you were at I've been to parties with transsexuals, there seems to be more and more of them all the time. It's not like I run away. What? Yeah.
There literally are more and more of them.
Constantly. Yeah. It's not like I run away screaming. It's not like I punch them in the face and run away. So it's like, I don't know. How do you handle this? How we can talk about this all that we want, but if we're not ever willing to say no, not okay, it's just going to keep happening.
Right. Well, and it's funny, the interesting, we hang out with mentally ill people all the time. I guess in some ways that's true. The difference is two things. First of all, if your grandpa is schizophrenic and has voices in his head, you don't respond by going, those voices are real, I'm going to pretend. I'm going to pretend with you. We're going to play along that the guy in your head telling you to kill someone, oh, that's a real guy. And you have no, obvious. So the response to mental illness is not to affirm it. Right. But the other thing is that the difference about transgenderism as a kind of mental illness is that it has an ideological component, right? Schizophrenia is not an ideological project, right? It is something that manifests. We recognize as mental illness. We try to treat it, et cetera, right? Transgenderism is both a assumed or constructed identity people embrace on an individual level and an ideological transformative project on a civilizational level. And everything that you're talking about identity being optional, it's 100% true. And in many ways, transgenderism is the final frontier of liberation, right? First, you liberate people from sort of class constructs. Then you liberate, women from gender norms, right? Then you liberate gay people from the constructs of the definition of marriage, right? You're deconstructing barriers, and the final frontier is to liberate them from biology itself, from something that is literally written into your body. And if you don't put your foot down here, you're not going to put your foot down on anything. You have to stand up for limits.
I completely agree. I think Dugan says exactly that. It's liberation from, and then finally he says there's even one more step, which is liberation from being human. So it's liberation from sex and then liberation from being human, which I guess would mean being a computer or whatever, attack helicopter. But but what do we do? This is the problem. What do we actually do about this? because I'm not gonna, like, to me, it's about, the best I can think is, it's to do something kind of Bappian, which this is why it shocks me so much that he has said this, because it's like the nature of the biker gang, of the pirate gang, of the drug gang, of any of these things, it's hyper masculine because there's rules, and if you break those rules, you get very severely punished, right? It's like there's an omerta, there's a code, and the best I can think of is whatever things we're starting have to start with a certain code. They have to start with a certain code of ethics that is fraternity like or gang like. It's like, no bullshit, harsh criticism, hard work, no safetyism, all these kind of like things that you would see inside a fraternity. And you just have to build that shit in from the beginning. I think one group that's really doing that very well is the guys in El Segundo. This El Segundo tech scene, it's these based young guys. A lot of them are super Christian. I have a piece coming out in the Blaze about this in the near future. But I went down there for a couple of days. And, it's all dudes, which I'm not saying is good. We need women eventually, or not need, but women will come eventually. But they all work 14 hours a day. They check up on each other in the middle of the night. If they're not working, they say, you're never going to make it. You suck. There's a certain code that they have. And I think there's a few bits of code that we have, like don't dox. Nobody would ever be pro doxing, no matter how bad anything got, which is good. I think rules like that are good. But I don't know. I'm sort of at a loss beyond that for how to solve this problem.
Yeah. Well, obviously, that's the question of our time, right? So I don't have a perfect answer. I'm trying to sort of begin to formulate one. There's kind of there's the civil society side, which is what this group El Segundo sounds like it's doing. And there actually, there are efforts to do that in DC too, amongst young conservatives. My buddy, I don't think he'd be mad at me talking about this. My buddy, Nino Scalia, who's Antonin Scalia's grandson.
Nice.
Awesome guy. He's starting a young men's group in DC for young conservative men, right? And they work out together. I think they do Bible study together. They're Christian. And it's all the same things you're talking about. It is essentially and explicitly, intentionally masculine. It is for men. There is there's a sort of a masculine essence to it. And it's about, they go on trips on the weekends. The way I'm describing it, it sounds almost like Boy Scouty, which is not. It's cool. It's but they work out together. They're really cool guys. But that is, you have to form new institutions like that, right, to build from the ground up. And there are efforts to do that. At least the beginnings of one. On the political level, which is related but distinct. You need to build a right that is capable of actually stepping into the breach, which we definitively don't have right now. And that's a political project that happens both inside and outside of DC, but you need people on the right who aren't in DC talk about how DC sucks and it's useless and nothing interesting happens there. And on one level, that's true. On the other level, it is the imperial capital. And you do need people here building something because, partially it's a incremental project, which is building a right that can kind of come into power, do things that we agree with, that kind of thing. Part of it is actually an infrastructure project that has much more radical aims, which is if there is a crisis level moment, right, in the next couple decades, which I think right now, barring some major course correction, there almost invariably is going to be real kind of civilizational crisis level moment where all of a sudden everything kind of begins to fall apart. You have the organized, motivated, competent, and connected network of people with the political capacity, with the positions, right? With the connections who can step into the breach and actually build something new that is capable of radically transforming the country, which is the only solution right now, right? You can't, long-term incrementalism doesn't work. There is an entire regime that needs to be dismantled and replaced. And right now, the project, I think, is keeping the candle burning or lighting new candles in 1,000 different places and laying the infrastructure so that when that moment does come, and it will come, we are the ones who are ready to step into the breach, and are able to replace it with something better.
Is that why it's called America 2100? Because it's like in the year 2100?
Yeah, I didn't come up with a name, but I like to think that's my spin on it, is that's what it's about. I mean, and that is basically like the project is building a new right. But it's not, like we're trying to do sort of like political advocacy, like that kind of aspect of it. And that's a critical part. But you need people doing staffing. You need people building like these organizations outside of DC in Silicon Valley, which is like another power center, right? Like you need, young up and coming kids to get plugged into these power centers to connect with one another. Like the internet is obviously like the single most revolutionary tool in building this kind of like collective consciousness amongst young right wingers as well. Like all of that stuff needs to happen in conjunction with each other, and then it needs to get connected into like one coherent system.
Yeah, it's so funny. I don't know which episode I'm going to publish first, probably his, but I just, right before you, I had Kevin Dolan, Bennett's Phylactery on. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Great guy. And one of my favorite people in our whole scene. And he says literally the exact same thing that you're saying. It's like, it's all about waiting for this moment when the decline begins and having, a few good men who are, ready to act like men in that circumstance, and that will really be the moment. I mean, he had this great thing where he looks at the numbers of the baby boom, and it's like in Europe it was actually during the war that's when the baby boom was happening. It wasn't afterwards. It was like during the bombings. Like that's when people were having sex.
Getting
and
busy,
it's like it's almost like we need this breach. We need this dip, this competency dip, or whatever this falling apart moment is going to be. Like we have to have it in order for us to be men again, because we just need a little bit of chaos where like real men can step up and like act like men, because right now it just seems so impossible to do. Right. It's like we're completely stuck. But then there's people who say, well, I'm not, I don't want to wait around. I want to build something now. I want to fight this fight now, which I also understand, and not in a Fed posty way, of course, at all. I mean, literally just not just build for when the thing happens, but actually try to enact change in some sort of way now. And I think really the private sector is like the only place you can do that. You can just build your own stuff. You can build your own companies, basically.
Yeah. No, 100%. And like, to be clear, like what I'm saying about like waiting for the breach, like, that is not emphatically not an excuse to not do everything that you can now. And in some ways, like the way to build something that is prepared for that moment, the white pill is like that moment is coming. Like increasingly, it seems like sooner rather than later.
But
like
what is that moment going to be? Because I don't know if I'm so convinced that moment is coming. Like what, I mean, of course, it's always coming, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, why, what is going to cause it? What's going to really make that moment happen?
Well, you don't obviously know the exact spark until it comes, right? But like, I mean, there's geopolitical stuff, right? War with China, collapse of like the US economy. There's a bunch of different sort of like technical, political like terms for what is exactly is going to happen. But like the more fundamental sense is like, we are increasingly incapable as a nation and broadly as a civilization of doing the basic things necessary to maintain a society, right? That becomes more apparent across sectors every single day. And when you're no longer capable of doing that, and also like when the myth the ruling regime tells about itself is completely delegitimized, like you are going to have a moment. In some ways, like 2020 was like, we got kind of close actually to like a full on, like we were a lot of people who like weren't involved in like Stop the Steal movement, and I wasn't, but I know people who were, don't realize like just how close they got to like numerous different swing state legislators literally overturning like the election, right? Which would have caused a constitutional crisis very much resembling what we're talking about now, right? Like, do we think 2024 is going to be like less chaotic? Maybe it's going to be more chaotic, right? Like, we don't know. The polarization is only becoming more and more pronounced. And that's only one like route to crisis. Like there's economic, there's mass migration, right? Like you have everything is falling apart at the seams. And like, I mean, that cannot physically continue with the way that it's continuing now. So the chaos is going to continue to sort of metastasize until it doesn't anymore, right? Until it stops. But the point I was making before is just that, like, trying to be in the fight to actually do something about it in a way is a kind of building, right? Because people are building, like, you know, I'm trying to help build a new institution in DC, partially to do advocacy now, and partially, like, through the act of doing work now, build something that is capable in a more muscular sense of doing something much more significant later, being a small part of that machine, right? So that's, I think the two are inextricably married. They're not sort of mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely is coming. I mean, something's coming. It is always coming. It's just like, man, I think this is actually the perfect place to sum up, because it really does go back to what we started, which is the managerial revolution. And the managerial revolution wants everything atomized. It wants everything optional. It wants everything ultra individualized, because that's full control. You know, a tranny pays hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a tranny, right? Because and that's exactly what it wants. It wants identity to be something you buy, which is kind of a Marxy, that's a little bit of a Marxist kind of lefty thing to say in some ways. But it's so completely powerful now. It's so completely in control. And, I hope that, that day is coming where something, it double, it blinks, when will it blink? Because it just seems to, you're right though. I mean, all this stuff is very precipice. Before you go, I know, let's just say, you have this space coming up tomorrow. I just saw it in my feed. So what is your association with, Rufo and Lomez, et cetera?
So I don't know. I mean, I was on a space with him once with Rufo like a month ago. But I don't know him beyond that. Although, I mean, my sympathy is with him during, the sort of doxing trial. Although he seems like he's like totally taking it on the chin.
I mean, it looks like it seems like they did this on purpose. I'm sure this sold way more books than.
Yeah, I know. It's like been nothing but like afforded him street cred. But and also, like, if anything, people have more, he's like a hot Chad, like, who's like married and like has a sex, like, why is this supposed to be like embarrassing? But Rufo I've known for like years and is a great guy. I was up at his house like in Seattle before I came out to DC a few months ago.
Oh, cool.
So he's been awesome. He's like a great kind of like mentor to kind of kids my age, and he's doing God's work. So that's how I know him.
Wait, Rufo's your age?
No, mentor.
Oh, two kids. I was gonna say, holy shit.
He's like he's a millennial, so I guess he's like not that much.
Yeah, I
older.
think Rufo's like my age, or maybe a little older. But yeah, no, I don't really know much about Rufo. He seems cool. He seems great. I love what he's doing. And so, yeah, I think it's very cool that you're appearing with them tomorrow.
Thanks.
So, beyond that, anything else to talk about? Anything else to shill?
Nothing to shill. I guess follow me on Twitter at NJ Hochman, Hochman. That's my only shill item.
Are you working on a book or anything? You got a book coming? Anything like that?
Maybe, but like not in the immediate future. Just kind of writing articles and, trying to build this organization. So no books.
Where do you write for? Where do you like to write for the most?
I mean, all over the place, but my like home publication is the American Spectator. I'm a columnist or like a staff writer, or whatever you want to call it for them. But I write for like a lot of the conservative outlets. I might review Orrin McIntyre's new book for IM 1776. I haven't written for them.
Total State.
Yeah. Have you read it yet?
No, I haven't.
I'm looking forward to it. I haven't read it yet, but
yeah, I like Orrin. I like, I like I like that whole dialectic video that he was telling us to watch. That was pretty cool.
He's another Burnham guy.
That would make sense. That would make sense. Cool, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining. This was great. And appreciate your time, dude.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, man. That was a lot of fun.